Hey everyone, welcome back to the Narcissist Exposed channel. I'm glad you're here, because today we're stepping into a psychological territory most people never get to see, the private thoughts of a narcissist long after you've walked away. This is the question that lingers in the quiet hours, the one that returns when memories surface. What does the narcissist really think about you now? Not the version they show others, not the lies they tell themselves, but the truth hiding in the shadows of their mind. Long separation doesn't erase you from a narcissist memory. It does the opposite. It magnifies your presence in ways you'd never expect. They remember you not as a person but as a symbol of control, validation, and emotional impact. And the moment your life drifts beyond their reach, their thoughts begin twisting into something far more obsessive. They cannot stand the ambiguity of distance. What they can't see, they fill with fantasies, assumptions, and fears. You see, narcissists don't experience separation like normal people. They don't process loss. They don't reflect with sincerity. Instead, they experience a psychological void, a hollow emptiness they desperately try to fill with stories about you. They ask themselves whether you still think about them, whether they still have power over your emotions, and whether their influence still lives somewhere inside your mind. Your silence becomes a mystery they cannot untangle. The longer the silence grows, the louder their internal narrative becomes. They replay moments from the past, but not with nostalgia. They analyze them. They dissect them. They search for proof that your heart is still tethered to them in some invisible way. Because to a narcissist, separation is not an ending. It's a test of whether they still matter, a test of whether you're still predictable, a test of whether they can still claim emotional ownership, even from miles away. What makes this so unsettling is that narcissists are not thinking about the relationship itself. They are thinking about the emotional impact they once had on you. Did you break? Did you cry? Did you struggle to let go? These memories become trophies in their mind, reminders of the power they once wielded. And when they think about you now, they're not seeking closure. They're seeking confirmation that their influence was as permanent as they believed. But silence has a strange effect on them. At first, they assume you're still emotionally available in their mental universe. They imagine you waiting, hurting, or replaying memories just like they do. But as time passes and nothing changes, no texts, no emotional slips, no accidental signals, doubt begins creeping in. That doubt threatens everything they built their identity on. Because your healing challenges the illusion of their importance. This is where the narcissist's thoughts become contradictory. Some days, they convince themselves you still think of them constantly, unable to move on. Other days, they fear the opposite, that you no longer feel anything at all. And that fear is their private nightmare. Because neutrality, not hatred, is what breaks their ego. They need to believe they left a permanent mark. They need to believe your world still revolves around their memory. As the separation grows longer, the narcissist begins imagining different versions of you. In one version, you're still wounded, longing for answers. In another, you're angry and bitter. But the version they fear the most, the one that keeps them up at night, is the version of you who healed, the version who found peace, confidence, independence, the version who finally saw through them. This version threatens their entire psychological structure. The truth is, they think about you far more often than you would ever imagine. Not because they miss you, but because they are terrified of what your absence means. It means they no longer have emotional access to you. It means their presence is no longer a force in your life. It means their control has evaporated. And for someone whose identity is built on dominance, that loss is catastrophic. So as we begin this journey together, remember one thing. The narcissist's thoughts about you after a long separation are not simple. They are chaotic, conflicted, and deeply revealing. They show us what they fear, what they crave, and what they can never admit. And as we move into the next chapter, you'll see exactly how their psychology twists, fractures, and spirals when the person they once controlled finally slips beyond reach. Chapter 2: Psychological Breakdown. When enough time has passed, and the world has quieted, the narcissist begins to feel something they aren't equipped to name, a psychological discomfort that tightens around them. It isn't loneliness or sadness, it's the unsettling realization that their emotional influence might no longer live inside you. This thought begins as a whisper in the back of their mind, but it grows louder each day. They start wondering whether the story they created about you is still true, or if you have transformed into someone they can no longer predict. To cope with this uncertainty, they begin reconstructing the past in their mind. They replay arguments, moments of vulnerability, and emotional slips you once had. But instead of reflecting with humility, they interpret these memories as proof of their power. They tell themselves, "They needed me, they couldn't let go, they always came back." These memories become their shield against the possibility that you've grown. They cling to them as if rewriting the past can control the future. But beneath that shield, fear simmers. Narcissists depend on the belief that they are unforgettable, irreplaceable, and permanently engraved into your emotional history. So when the separation stretches longer than their ego expects, they start to panic. They wonder if your silence is a strategy or a sign of strength. They wonder if you've met someone new, someone steady, someone who treats you with respect. These thoughts gnaw at them because your happiness without them feels like evidence of their insignificance. As their fear grows, so does their need to regain psychological control. This is when they start imagining scenarios that place them back at the center of your life. They picture you replaying old messages, rereading conversations, or thinking about the good moments you shared. They convince themselves you're still emotionally attached. This fantasy becomes essential to maintaining their self-image. If they lose the belief that you still care, they lose the illusion that they were ever powerful. Eventually, their mind turns to justification. If you haven't returned, if you haven't reached out, if you haven't crumbled without them, they need a story that preserves their ego. So they begin reframing you as someone who is too sensitive, too unstable, or too ungrateful. This narrative protects them from acknowledging their own destruction. They rewrite your boundaries as betrayal, your healing as disrespect, and your silence as immaturity. These distortions stabilize them, but only temporarily. The longer the separation lasts, the more distorted their thoughts about you become. They may swing from idealizing you, remembering you as the best thing they ever had, to resenting you for walking away. But both extremes serve a single purpose: to avoid the truth that your absence exposes. Narcissists cannot accept that someone they once controlled now holds emotional autonomy. So they twist their thoughts into whatever shape helps them avoid confronting their own inadequacy. This cognitive chaos eventually forces them into one of their deepest fears, the fear that you truly see them now. They worry that you've pieced together the manipulation, the inconsistencies, and the emotional tactics they used. They fear you've shared your story with others, that people now see the version of them they tried desperately to hide. They know you hold truth they cannot rewrite, and this gives you a power over them they cannot erase, even in silence. In their attempt to regain control, the narcissist starts scanning for signs that you might still be emotionally affected. They look for tiny clues, changes in your social media, indirect messages, quotes, or even shifts in your lifestyle. They interpret everything as either validation or threat. A confident post triggers their insecurity. A quiet one triggers their suspicion. Your life becomes a puzzle they're desperate to solve because understanding it feels like a last chance to reclaim psychological ownership. As the separation stretches even longer, another fear emerges: the fear that they underestimated you. They begin questioning whether you were stronger, smarter, or more intuitive than they realized. They wonder if you saw through them sooner and stayed quiet for reasons they never recognized. This uncertainty rattles them deeply, because narcissists depend on believing they outsmart everyone. And if they misjudged you, even once, it means their entire belief system is flawed. So, after all this time, what is the narcissist really thinking about you now? They think of you as both a threat and a story they must control. They think of you as an unresolved question, a lingering warning, a mirror reflecting weaknesses they cannot confront. Their thoughts are not linear. They are a storm of insecurity, denial, fantasy, and fear. And as we enter the turning point, You'll see how their behavior shifts when they finally realize the truth. They no longer have any power over you. Chapter 3. The Turning Point. The turning point always arrives in silence, never in a dramatic moment, never with a final message or confrontation. It happens when the narcissist finally recognizes something they never expected. You are no longer emotionally accessible, not triggered, not wounded, not waiting. Just this realization hits them like a psychological collapse, because your emotional unavailability is the one outcome they believed was impossible. They built their identity on the assumption that you'd always react. At first, they try to deny what's happening. They tell themselves you're playing a game, trying to punish them, or waiting for the perfect moment to return. Denial is their last attempt to maintain the illusion of control. But denial cannot survive the evidence: your steady silence, your stable life, your emotional distance. Slowly, they feel something unfamiliar creeping in, the awareness that they no longer influence your world. This terrifies them more than losing any relationship ever could. Once denial cracks, their thoughts take a darker turn. They begin to panic because they cannot predict you anymore. To a narcissist, unpredictability equals danger. Their entire manipulation system depends on knowing how you respond, your patterns, your triggers, your emotional cycles. And now, every assumption they once relied on is broken. You've become an independent variable they cannot control, and losing this predictability feels like losing a part of themselves. This panic quickly turns into obsession. They start mentally replaying the last moments of your connection, hunting for clues, trying to identify the exact point where they lost you. They analyze every detail: your tone, your expressions, your last words. The more they search, the more they realize something devastating. You didn't just leave them physically, you detached emotionally long before the separation actually happened. And that emotional detachment is what destroys them. As this truth sinks deeper, they shift into ego protection mode. They can't accept that you outgrew the relationship, so they convince themselves you changed suddenly, irrationally, or unfairly. In their mind, you didn't evolve. They were betrayed. This distorted narrative shields their fragile identity from recognizing the reality. You woke up, saw through the illusion, and refused to be controlled anymore. Your clarity feels like an attack on their character. This is when the narcissist's thoughts swing violently between fantasies of reconciliation and fantasies of revenge. One moment, they imagine you returning, apologizing, and admitting you never moved on. The next moment, they imagine shaming you, replacing you, or proving they never needed you. These oscillations aren't about you, they're about regulating their collapsing ego. They are fighting to preserve a sense of self that cannot survive your indifference. But the true turning point arrives when they finally realize something that terrifies them more than rejection. You're happier without them. They see small signs: your energy, your confidence, your peace, and those signs signal a psychological death blow. Happiness is the one outcome their ego cannot process, because it proves that they weren't the source of your joy. In their mind, your healing becomes an insult, a reminder of their failure to break you permanently. When this realization settles in, you transform in their mind. You're no longer someone they controlled. You're someone who escaped. This changes the dynamic entirely. You become a threat, a living reminder of their emotional limitations, a symbol of the truth they fear. They are not as powerful as they pretend to be. The narcissist fears your clarity because your clarity exposes their fraud. And once you see them clearly, they lose the ability to manipulate you. This transformative moment forces them to face a harsh reality. They cannot return to the old dynamic. You are no longer reachable in the ways that mattered to them. Your heart has new boundaries. Your mind has new strength. Your spirit no longer bends. They sense this shift, like animals sensing an approaching storm. Every attempt to reclaim the old cycle fails before it begins, because the version of you who once needed them no longer exists. And here lies the heart of the turning point. They finally understand that the emotional cord has been cut on your side, and only your side. They may still feel ownership, entitlement, or lingering obsession, but none of it matters anymore. You've reclaimed yourself, and once a person reclaims themselves, the narcissist loses their foothold forever. This realization creates the psychological collapse that unfolds in the next chapter. Chapter 4. Collapse and Consequences. The collapse begins quietly, almost invisibly. Narcissists don't melt down in one dramatic moment. They unravel in fragments, slowly and privately. It starts when they check their phone impulsively, expecting a message that never comes. Then they revisit old conversations, hoping to feel the familiar rush of control. But the feeling isn't there anymore. Every piece of silence you give them becomes another crack in the mask they spent years crafting, and with each crack, their inner world grows more unstable. They try distracting themselves with new people, new experiences, or new fantasies, but nothing sticks. The thrill fades quickly. The validation feels shallow. The attention doesn't hit the way it used to, because deep down, they know these new people don't see them the way you once did. They don't react as intensely. They don't engage as deeply, and they don't feed the narcissist's ego with the same emotional richness. This emptiness becomes a reminder of the power they once held over you and lost. As this internal emptiness grows, they begin to feel something close to withdrawal. You were their emotional ecosystem. Even if they never admitted it, your reactions fed their self-esteem. Your confusion fed their sense of superiority. Your pain fed their control. Without that energy, the narcissist feels starved. But rather than confronting the truth that they relied on you, they blame you for abandoning them. This denial protects their ego, but it also traps them in a cycle of emotional starvation. Socially, the consequences come next. They start retelling your story to others, trying to reshape the narrative in their favor. They cast themselves as the victim, you as the unstable one, hoping others will validate their version of events. But their story doesn't hold up the way it used to. People notice inconsistencies. People ask questions. People don't react with the same sympathy. And when the narcissist senses social doubt, their anxiety spikes, because their identity depends on maintaining the image of innocence. As doubts grow in their social circle, the narcissist becomes more paranoid. They begin imagining conversations happening behind their back. They fear you've told others the truth. They fear their carefully curated image is cracking. This paranoia isn't about guilt, it's about reputation. The fear that people might see their real nature becomes unbearable, because their entire life is built on performance, and once the audience stops believing, the performance loses its purpose. This leads to the emotional collapse, a growing sense of internal instability they cannot escape. They feel restless, irritable, and easily threatened. Small inconveniences trigger exaggerated reactions. Minor disagreements feel like attacks. Their tolerance for discomfort disintegrates entirely. And under all of this is one persistent truth they refuse to speak. Your absence exposed how fragile they really are. Without someone to absorb their chaos, their emotions turn inward and begin destroying them from the inside. Eventually, the narcissist begins grasping for ways to pull you back into their psychological orbit. They may not reach out directly, but they test the environment. They stalk your social media. They ask mutual connections about you. They post cryptic messages designed to provoke your attention. They try to recreate the emotional echo of your presence. But every attempt fails, because you're no longer participating in the emotional game. And every failure amplifies their sense of powerlessness. This powerlessness becomes the core of their consequences. For someone who built their identity on dominance, losing even one person's emotional dependence feels like a catastrophic blow. They begin doubting themselves, something they almost never do. They question their charm, their influence, their attractiveness, their worth. These doubts spiral quickly, because narcissists have no internal framework for self-esteem. They rely entirely on external validation, and your silence removes one of their most consistent sources. As doubt grows, so does regret, but not the kind of regret healthy people feel. Narcissistic regret isn't about the pain they caused, it's about losing the benefits you provided. They miss the attention, the admiration, the devotion, the emotional chaos that made them feel in control. They don't regret hurting you. They regret losing someone they could manipulate, and that regret becomes a quiet torment that lingers long after the relationship ends. By now, the collapse is complete. They feel unanchored, unbalanced, and painfully aware that the story they told themselves about you no longer holds power. Your life has continued. Theirs is frozen in the moment they realized they lost control. And as we move into the final chapter, you'll see the truth they can never escape. Your healing isn't just something they notice. It's something that destroys the illusion they built their entire identity upon. Chapter 5. Final Truth and Healing. The final truth begins to set in when the narcissist realizes something they never prepared for. You didn't just move on, you transformed. They see a version of you they never imagined, someone calmer, stronger, wiser, someone who no longer carries the wounds they created. And this evolution forces a painful acknowledgement inside them. They expected you to crumble without their presence. They expected you to orbit their memory. Instead, you built an entirely new emotional universe. This unexpected transformation causes the narcissist to reassess everything they believed about you. They once viewed you as predictable, manageable, someone whose emotions they could twist with a single word. Now you appear untouchable. The shift in your energy confuses them profoundly because it reveals a truth they spent years denying. You always had the ability to outgrow them. Your strength wasn't born from their absence. It was waiting patiently for your freedom. And here's the part they will never admit aloud. They admire you now more than they ever did when you were with them. Not in a healthy, respectful way, but in the way someone admires what they cannot possess. Your resilience becomes both captivating and infuriating to them. It's proof that you had a depth they never recognized, a depth they were too self-absorbed to appreciate. In their twisted logic, your healing becomes a betrayal, but admiration quickly turns into fear. Your growth means you've gained something they lost, self-awareness. And self-awareness is the one thing a narcissist dreads in someone they once controlled. Because awareness brings boundaries, awareness brings clarity, awareness brings emotional independence. They know that if they approached you now, their old tactics would fail instantly. You've become immune to the spell that once held you captive. This fear forces them into an uncomfortable truth. They can no longer return to the relationship in any form, not as a lover, not as a friend, not even as a distant presence. You've crossed a psychological threshold they cannot follow. You operate on a level of emotional maturity that they cannot access. And the narcissist now understands that you didn't just walk away from them, you evolved beyond them. So what do they think of you now, after all this time? They think of you as the one who got away, not in a romantic sense, but in a psychological sense. You were the one who slipped through their fingers and exposed the limits of their control. They replay your story not because they miss love, but because they miss power. And losing power over someone like you becomes an emotional scar they never fully heal from. Over time, this realization becomes part of their internal narrative. You become the reminder of a chapter they couldn't dominate, a person they couldn't break, a story they couldn't rewrite. They may replace you with new people, new admirers, new sources of validation, but none of it replicates the complexity of what they lost. Because losing someone who outgrew them means losing the illusion of superiority they built their identity upon. But while they remain stuck in a loop of fear, regret, and obsession, your story takes a different turn. You begin living with a sense of peace that feels new, almost unfamiliar. You rediscover parts of yourself that were buried under their chaos. You build connections rooted in mutual respect. You feel emotions without fear of punishment. Most importantly, you finally understand that survival was never enough. You were always meant to reclaim your entire life. And this is where the real healing begins. Not when you forgive them, not when you understand them, but when you understand yourself. When you see how far you've come. When you recognize your own strength. When you realize that the person you became after them is someone you absolutely needed to meet. The separation wasn't just an ending. It was an initiation into a stronger, wiser version of yourself. So here is the final truth. After all this time, the narcissist may still think about you. still wonder about you, still feel the sting of losing control. But none of that matters anymore. What matters is that you reclaimed your story. You reclaimed your identity. You reclaimed your peace. And in the end, that's the one outcome they never expected, but the only outcome that truly sets you free.